Hello and welcome to L2R. I'm Kinaesthesia, and today I'll be going over the strategy for Halfus Wyrmbreaker on the 25 normal difficulty. Mr. Wyrmbreaker is the first and easiest boss in the Bastion of Twilight raid instance, and with a little understanding of the mechanics, your raid should have no trouble taking him down. The Halfus encounter is intended to be a DPS check for your raid. He has about 116 million HP and can require 2 to 3 tanks depending on your preference. You'll want to bring 6 or 7 healers to ensure a safer kill, but may have a hard time dropping healers if DPS is lacking. The DPS makeup should be balanced, though there are some advantages to bringing mages for their range interrupt and blink ability. Halfus comes with 3 of 5 possible adds, and before the strategy can be understood, the adds' abilities must be. Halfus and his pet proto-behemoth begin the fight with an assortment of random buffs. Around the room, your raid will notice 5 unique adds locked in cages. The buffs on Halfus and the proto-behemoth directly correlate to the adds in the cages. Here are the buffs Halfus may have. Malevolent Strikes is given by the Slate Dragon add and gives Halfus a stacking Mortal Strike debuff on each of his melee attacks. Frenzied Assault is gained by the Nether Scion and increases Halfus' attack speed by 100%. Shadow Nova is gained from the Storm Rider and will allow Halfus to occasionally unleash dark magic. This will deal around 30,000 shadow damage to all players and knock them back. The Proto-Behemoth can gain the following buffs. Fireball Barrage, gained from the Time Warden, will allow the Behemoth to unleash a stream of fireballs at random players. In Scorching Breath, gained from the Orphaned Emerald Whelps, will allow the Behemoth to breathe flame at all players in front of him, dealing heavy fire damage. On normal mode, your raid will only be able to interact with 3 of the 5 possible drakes. Which 3 are active is selected randomly, and the difficulty of the fight can shift depending on the combination. At the start of the fight and throughout it, your raid may choose to unlock any of the interactable drakes from their cage. Doing so will cause the Drake to place a debuff on Halfus, decreasing the difficulty of the fight. However, shortly after this, Halfus will bind the Drake to his will and your raid will be forced to contend with it. Here are the debuffs the Drakes will apply. Stone Touch, applied by the Slate Dragon, will cause Halfus to occasionally become paralyzed for 12 seconds. He will be unable to attack or move. The Nether Scion will afflict Halfus with Nether Blindness. This will reduce his chance to hit, his attack speed, and his overall damage by 25%. Cyclone Winds will slow the boss's casting speed by 500%. This is applied to him by the Storm Rider and makes Shadow Nova much easier to interrupt. The Proto-Behemoth may also be afflicted with debuffs from the Drakes. Time Dilation, applied by the Time Warden, will cause the Behemoth's fireballs to fly at much slower speeds, allowing the raid to move out of fireballs and reduce overall raid damage. The Emerald Whelp Pack will apply Atropic Poison once per each whelp. This reduces his damage by 750 and stacks 8 times. In addition, each Drake your raid frees will apply a stacking 50% increased damage taken debuff to Halfus. Once the boss is below 50%, he will periodically cast an unavoidable, uninterruptible ability called Furious Roar. This will deal around 10,000 damage 3 times in quick succession for a total of 30,000 damage to all players. Once the buffs and debuffs are understood, it's about knowing what the biggest threat is. At the start of the fight, the weaker geared tank, Tank A, should begin on Halfus while the stronger tank, Tank B, unlocks and picks up the first Drake. Have a hunter unlock the second Drake at the same time and misdirect it to Tank B. It is random which Drakes will be active, but it is important to know which ones are most dangerous. Storm Rider should always be released if it is active. Failing to do this will cause Shadow Nova to be extremely difficult to interrupt. After that, Nether Scion should be released only if Slate Dragon is also active. The 2 of these together will cause a very fast stacking Mortal Strike on your Halfus tank. If only one or the other, Slate or Nether, is active, your raid may opt to skip unlocking either in favor of the Time Warden. This can allow you to see the fireballs long before they reach the ground and move out of them successfully. By doing this, Your raid can remove almost all of the raid damage and allow healers to focus more on the tanks. Once you've decided which drakes you are releasing, your setup should look similar to this. One tank on Halfus in the center of the room, one tank on the 2 drakes of your choice, very close to Halfus in the center of the room, and the raid spread out around the boss to more easily dodge fireballs. Once the tank has decent threat, DPS should focus on killing the 2 drakes as quickly as possible. The drakes themselves do not have any special abilities aside from meleeing somewhat hard. Focus healers on the tanks heavily until the drakes have been killed, and make sure the raid avoids as much fireball damage as possible. If the Slate Dragon is active and the boss has Malevolent Strike, you may want Tank B and Tank A to tank 1 drake each and taunt Halfus off of each other at mid to high stacks. Failing to do this may leave one tank with an unhealable Mortal Strike debuff. Another option is to have a 3rd tank to taunt Halfus off of Tank A while the Mortal Strike stack resets. This may not be feasible, however, if DPS is a concern. Once both active drakes have been killed, your raid has 2 options. Focus DPS on Halfus and kill him using the 100% increased damage taken debuff, or release the 3rd drake for a 150% damage taken debuff. If you choose to release a 3rd tank, simply have Tank B run over to release him from his cage. Do not focus any DPS on the 3rd drake. He is merely being released to apply the debuff to Halfus. At this point, all DPS can start on Halfus, and the fight is essentially a tank and spank until around 50%. When Halfus reaches phase 2, he will begin to use his Furious Roar ability. This attack deals 10,000 damage to all players and knocks them to the ground. Casting spells during this is almost impossible, and he will roar 3 times in a row before ceasing. The easiest way to handle this is to be prepared for it. Make sure the tanks are topped off, and depending on what classes are in the raid, try to set up a cooldown rotation. For example, the tanks can shield wall during the first Furious Roar, receive a Pally Sack during the second, and get a Priest Guardian Spirit or Pain Suppression during the third. If the boss is casting Shadow Nova during a Furious Roar, you will want to have a mage blink out of the 3rd knockdown of each roar and counterspell the boss during this cast. This Shadow Nova will be difficult for melee to interrupt. Overall, this fight is not very difficult and should not prove to be much trouble for the average guild. Understand the abilities and recognize which ones pose real threats. That's the key to success in this encounter.
And cozy, all scrunched up in front of my phonograph. And I sat there and I closed my eyes and listened to all the sweet music.